once we go down through this, I've got a little presentation that I'll give you. But just to answer, first off, you guys send in a lot of questions that have nothing to do with maintenance. so I'm wagging my finger at you. But anyways, maintaining and planting on steep slopes, very difficult thing. Start off with a really difficult question. It's the kind of thing that if you're doing it for an HOA, I'd plan on it taking some time to figure it out, because whenever you're working on a deep slope or steep slope, it could be full sun or it could be full shade. So you've got to determine what your site conditions are for you. But the biggest thing I try and tell people in difficult situations, it's best to pick a diverse set of plants and put them out there and kind of see what works and what doesn't. Because if you come up with this great plan and you install it, I would almost guarantee you that you're going to have some failures here and there. So have some patience, work through it, try some different plants. And again, if you're talking about ground covers, try 5 or 6 different ground covers to see which one does the best. If you're talking about ornamental grasses, 3 or 4 different types of ornamental grass to make sure that, they're happy and they're going to live there. If you're in shade, you're probably talking about ferns and sedges more than grasses and herbs. But prepare that you're not going to be successful completely, and be okay with that and just adjust to it as it's going along. Now, as far as maintaining it, that gets really tough depending on the slope and depending on how steep. So you're either going to have to get volunteers or a maintenance company in there to do some things, to cut some things back and do some weeding. Mulching is probably in order, but you're probably, if it's a really steep slope, you're going to probably have to use jute netting to hold things into place, and some sod pins to hold all that into place. So it can get a little complicated. But again, just be patient and just kind of expect to fail a few times before you finally find that special combination that works on the slope, and then go with that. Leaving leaves, replacing English ivy, removing and replacing bamboo. Again, you guys are throwing all these easy questions out here at me. First off, leave the leaves. Yes, that's the big thing to do. Mother Nature has given us this wonderful source of food for our plants. Let the plants eat it. The only thing I would advise you on is some of the smaller plants in the landscape might suffer under too many leaves. So things like foam flower, if you're using that as a ground cover in shade, even though it's a shade ground cover, it might get a little too smushed, and so you might have to plan on doing some raking or blowing to keep it off of there a little bit. But use that food when you can. Replacing English ivy, please do whenever you can. It's a very, what I call an ecosystem killer, because it really will destroy an ecosystem in our local area. And it's one of those plants that, unfortunately, back in the day, early 20s through the 70s, that was kind of the solution for erosion problems. And so everybody put it in. And, I go walking in the Great Falls National Park, and you see all those bordering properties that planted all that English ivy and that's now escaping into the park. And that's really bad when when our gardens extend past our own borders. That might not be a good thing if you have non-native invasive species in your garden. So be cautious of that, remove it where you can. And again, when you're replacing it, you want to think about diversity. You don't want to think about, well, how am I going to replace English ivy with one plant? You want to think about, well, how am I going to replace English ivy with different layers of plants? A ground level, an herbaceous level, a shrub level, a small tree level, an understory level. You have to think that in the whole picture of things rather than just, okay, I'm replacing this one plant. And removing and replacing bamboo is never an easy thing. You're probably going to have to same thing with English ivy. You're probably going to have to involve some glyphosate, which is Roundup, of course. People might not want to hear that from me, but you know, we're licensed applicators, and so we follow all the rules. And I tell everybody it's a tool in our toolbox, and it may be the last tool we reach for, but sometimes it's the only tool that works. And so I always say to people, would you rather have a lost ecosystem because it has been replaced by bamboo or replaced by English ivy, or would you do some short-term herbicide application to get rid of that stuff so that you can build back towards a more native landscape? And I'm always in favor of building back towards a native plant landscape and accepting the fact that we've messed some things up, and so we need to fix it. So ground cover alternatives to grass for shady areas. Again, not a maintenance question, but I would steer you towards ferns and sedges first off. Those are most of the time kind of deer-proof plants and like shady areas. And there's a wide variety of sedges. There's a wide variety of ferns. And so rather than list them all here today, I would tell you to do some research. There's great sources out on the web for these things. The National Wildlife Federation just built a search engine to help homeowners get the proper plants that they need. Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center that's the search engine that I use to cheat when I'm doing design. If I run into designer's block or something, I'll just go there and I'll say, I want a 3-foot tall plant that blooms purple in the middle of the summer and grows in full sun, and I got it. So it's kind of cheating, but it's an easy way to get some plants going. Meadow management and installation, difficult thing in this area because we have so many invasive species. Meadows are kind of meant to not be managed, but unfortunately, if you want to put in a meadow in our area, you are going to have to manage it. There is no alternative. If you just let it go, it'll quickly become porcelainberry and mile-a-minute vine and Oriental bittersweet and Japanese honeysuckle, you know, the usual suspects. And so, you know, have a plan that, you know, for the first 5 years, you're going to need to get out there and manage and pay attention to what's growing in the landscape and what you need to get rid of. And the main thing you're going to be looking for is invasive species, you know, like those ones I just mentioned, porcelainberry and mile-a-minute vine love meadow settings and will take it over. And the birds, of course, will drop the seed in there and get it started. So just plan on the fact that you're going to have to maintain it around here. It's not a maintenance-free landscape. So how can we help our residents better understand the different maintenance practices used to create a healthier landscape? It's a great question, and it's one that I think is something that's the most important for HOAs to kind of deal with, because before you start down this road of kind of switching over to native plants, you really need to educate your HOA members about what it is you have an idea on doing. I've worked with some HOAs where it was 1 or 2 people who were really gung-ho and really excited about, you know, switching things over to natives, and we come up with a plan and we come up with here's how we're going to do it, and then we present it to the broader bunch of people in the community, and they go, well, what are you doing? Why are you taking out our grass? So it's best to do that legwork ahead of time so that you kind of have everybody on board when it comes to doing this. As far as the different maintenance practices, you know, it's going to be a little wilder look, a more natural look, hopefully. You can prune things into a box and still have a native plant garden. I wouldn't suggest doing that, but you know, the main thing is you're going to have to get people to understand that native plant landscapes are living landscapes. And so that means that you're going to have caterpillars, you're going to have spiders, you're going to have snakes. You know, you're going to have things that live in your landscape, and some people might not want to hear that. But that's the reason why you you landscape with native plants is to bring life back to our areas where we've, you know, cut down the forest, put in a bunch of buildings, and replaced all the vegetation with non-native plants. Hopefully, if we can switch that out, we can bring some of that life back in. So we have a hillside berm that faces south in full sun with soundberry trees planted near it. Again, this is not a maintenance question, but they're asking about plants for a sunny hillside. And I honestly would steer you towards some of our native grasses. Little blue stem is a great plant for a slope that's in full sun. Broom sedge, Andropogon virginicus is another one. They're both very similar plants in that they're you know, we have successional landscapes everywhere in the world, but Mother Nature is always trying to get us back to a mature forest. And so if you go in and cut that forest down and just kind of leave it, one of the first plants here in Virginia that would come back is either little blue stem or broom sedge. And they're colonizers, and most people would think of them as being very invasive, but native plants are not invasive per se. They're colonizers. They're repairing the landscape to what it should be. And so if you can get a bunch of Andropogon or broom sedge started, you know, it's going to seed itself throughout there, and it's also going to set up the soil to be ready for the next phase of what that land becomes. And what'll happen is if you do nothing and you just kind of let it take over, and if we didn't have invasive species, is you'd start to get sumacs and eastern red cedars, and those are the next phase of succession. And so eventually that will turn into an oak hickory forest, but that's hundreds of years down the road, and we won't be around for that. So how do you keep the dogs off? I'm a dog guy, and you know, I'd say let your dogs roam and replace a few plants if you need to. I'm kind of partial to dogs. But implications of insecticides, herbicides used by landscaping companies. Honestly, depends on your company. You know, there are very strict laws about insecticide and herbicide application. And so if your landscaping company is doing that, they should be licensed to do so. They should be following the rules to do that. And I would tell you to, you know, one of the rules that they have to follow is that you don't spray insecticides unless there really is a problem, unless you have an insect. Now, I see a lot of companies completely ignore that rule, and they just broadcast spray to kill everything. And the big thing these days is these mosquito companies that go around spraying and kind of, you know, just throw it all out there, and they're killing kind of every insect around. And that's really bad. That's really, really bad. Very anti-native plant to be killing the insects that you're attracting to your landscape with your native plant. And so, you know, you just want to work with those companies to make sure that they're not just generalizing spraying, that they're only spraying when there's a problem. And you got to make sure that they're not spraying your baby monarchs, or not spraying your, you know, the insects that you're trying to raise. Very, very bad thing. And then incidents of fungal diseases and appropriate responses with dogwoods and redbuds. Couple of things on that. Dogwoods and redbuds are both affected by a couple of diseases at the moment. These are introduced diseases, and they were introduced when we introduced the cousins to our native dogwoods and redbuds. You've probably all heard of the Kuza dogwood. It is the carrier of the anthracnose that is killing off our native dogwoods. And unfortunately, my industry has kind of said, we'll quit planting American dogwoods and start planting Kuzas. I think that's exactly the opposite of what you should be doing. You should not be planting Kuzas, and you should be planting our native dogwoods. And I saw a great talk one time where a lady was talking about dogwoods, and somebody said, you know, well, what do you do with the dogwoods that get anthracnose? And she had what I thought was a really great answer, is that you're going to have that tree for 10 or 15 years. And for 10 or 15 years, That's a very important tree to our native songbirds as they migrate south for the wintertime. The fruit that dogwoods produce really can't be, replaced. And so if we're losing our native dogwoods, that means eventually we're going to lose a lot of native songbirds. And I know none of you want to do that. None of you want to lose the native dogwoods. So plant more of them. Generally, if you put them in sun, they won't get the anthracnose as bad as if you have them tucked away in a shady spot. So I would plant them in a more sunny area and enjoy them for 15 years, and if they die in 15 years, get another one and plant it again. Eventually what will happen is they'll develop their own immunity to the disease. It's just kind of like what we're going through with COVID at the moment. None of us are immune to it at the moment, so it's affecting a lot of us, but eventually, we hope to get some immunity to it or a vaccine or something like that. So what attractive native plants would you suggest could be planted around community pools and recreation areas? Well, there's tons of them. What I would tell you to do is hire a designer. That's the best way to do this, because if I name off a bunch of plants to you, that's great, but they may not be the right plants for your pool area. So hire a designer, get them to come over and have a look and make recommendations. Do your research on the designer, of course, and make sure you have the right person, and talk to a few people. Erosion again, the only real way to stop erosion is plant roots. And so that then comes down to what we've been talking about, is finding the right plant for the right spot. Try a few different things, see what's successful and what holds in your place. Do not plant English ivy. So we're removing English ivy, so we're looking for a shady area, native plants as a replacement. I'm going to show you, if we get to it in time, a project we did down in Alexandria where we removed a bunch of English ivy and replaced it with native ground covers. In that case, like I said, we chose about 5 or 6 different plants. If I'm remembering correctly, we chose crested iris, black-eyed Susan, some of our native phloxes. There's some woodland shade-loving phloxes, and I think some Amsonia. But eventually the black-eyed Susans kind of won the war and took over the hillside, and so they've got a big hillside of black-eyed Susans at the moment. And that's about 15 years ago we did that project, and it took a little while for everything to get going. But whenever you're removing English ivy, understand the fact that it's a 4 or 5 year commitment. It might even be more, because it's going to come back, and it's, there's no way you can get all the roots out. It's going to come back. So you're going to have to follow up again, maybe with some glyphosate. Hand pulling works, but again, the roots break off and you leave a little root there and they come back. So just realize that it's going to take a while to get rid of that plant. But you can do it. Recommended HOA trees, again, not a maintenance question, but quickly, I love oaks. They're, trees come in different sizes and why they're in the landscape. And so you have what I call climax trees. Those are the big oaks and the maples, the things that the hickories, the trees that live 500-600 years and get 70-80 feet tall. And again, oaks and hickories to me are some of my favorite. I like tulip poplars too, but they're kind of tough to deal with because they grow so fast, and their wood breaks and things. But then below that, you have an understory level. That's where your dogwoods and redbuds are. Carolina silver bells is another really good one in there. Sourwoods is a tree I like. And then you get into like service berries, which are a great fruit producing plant in case you want to have some more edible plants in the landscape. So that's a couple. How to educate a landscape maintenance provider on caring for native plants. Great question. What I would tell you is that if you're working with a landscaping company that you need to educate them how to do their job, you need to look for a new landscaping company.
Oh, gosh.
It's just that simple. There's a lot of landscape providers out there. Now, you have to be careful because you know, landscaping with native plants is a relatively new thing. I've been doing it for 30 years, but it really has caught on in the last 5 to 10 years. And so I can go to every landscaping website in Northern Virginia, almost, and it will say native plant landscapes. And that's just to help them with search engine optimization, because if somebody goes onto Google and searches for native plant landscaper, well, it'll take you to their website then. So, you know, that's where you start, is, you know, searching for some things, but then you need to test people and you need to ask them questions. You know, later on, I'm going to show you a slide where, you know, I talk about, you know, how do you test the maintenance company that they know what they're doing. So I'll leave that until we get to that slide. But maintenance of rain gardens and swales, it's important to keep debris out of them. You know, they're a place where water carries debris, and so sometimes they might get clogged up. And so you need to be cognizant of that and check it after major storms like we had yesterday. We have a property in Creighton Farms where we did a couple of rain gardens, and we were there yesterday afternoon just making sure it was working and everything was working fine. And you know, the system worked. It didn't get overloaded, and everything was good. But, you know, keep an eye on those things. You know, leave your plants there for the winter time and cut things back in the springtime. In most cases, there may be some call to cut things back in the fall or something, but stick with some native plants and you'll be okay. How can we get native plants more available to the general public? You can go to any place you shop for plants and ask for native plants. You know, we live in a capitalist society, which is a wonderful thing. And what that means is that you can drive the market. And that means that every time you go to a garden center, every time you go to a box store, ask for native plants. If they tell you they don't have any, leave, you know, and just say, well, thanks, you know, I'm looking for native plants. I'll be back when you have some. You know, here's my number. Call me when you get some in. I'd love to support you guys. You say that to a business owner, and that business owner is going to remember that. And that business owner is going to go, boy, there's where I'm missing some things. But again, I would also warn you that there's a lot of garden centers and a lot of box stores that if you go there asking for a native plant, this happens to me all the time. I'll go somewhere, I don't want to name names, but I'll go somewhere and I'll say, do you have Royo Juniperus virginiana, which is a cultivar of our eastern red cedar that goes kind of horizontal. No one ever has that plant because it's not widely grown yet. But every time I go to certain places, they'll say, oh, we don't have that. It's not a good plant. We don't carry it. But we do have this Chinese alternative. So, you know, you got to be a smart shopper and you got to sit there and go, well, thanks. You know, that's really great. But I heard this guy, John Magee, tell me you were going to do this to me. And so I'm sticking with the native and I'm going to go look somewhere else for it. You know, stick to your guns, and that will improve the availability of plants to the general public. Invasive, I love this question. Invasive plants are so easy to maintain. How can I convince the board that these should be replaced? You know, it's a battle that I honestly have with myself sometimes. And I would just, you know, again, it's kind of hard to talk science with some people. So I would just kind of put it to them in the terms that we're dealing with right now. We're dealing with COVID-19 at the moment, an invasive species. And it has spread all over the world in a matter of months. And that is an amazing thing, you know, and it has spread all over the world because we took it. You know, we got on a plane and took it with us to another place. And when I say we, I'm talking about mankind. And it's definitely a problem for us, but not to other species. Well, you know, if you look out in my yard, you'll see Japanese stilt grass. And, you know, it's a horrible mess. And what I try to tell people is the more diverse of the landscape that you can have, the healthier that landscape is. And so if you want to rid the world of things like COVID-19, you give it barriers that it has to pass through to get to the next place. You know, we've all talked about social distancing, being 6 feet apart, wearing a mask. You know, got mine right here. These are all important things that we're doing to stop the spread of this disease. Well, it's the same thing with invasive species. Japanese stiltgrass is the COVID-19 of our forest at the moment because it's replacing the understory of our forest. And so maybe if you can relate it into issues like things that actually affect us, that might help some people who just don't get it to see things a little better. But diversity is the biggest thing you want in your landscape. If my wife is 20 feet away from me and there's 17 bushes between us, well, that COVID-19's got to fight through those bushes that are not susceptible to it to get to me. So I'm safer if I've got those 17 bushes, and especially if they're all different species. And it's the same thing with trees. You know, if a dogwood has anthracnose and it's in a line with a bunch of other dogwoods, well, they're all going to get anthracnose. And so what do you want to do? You want to make that landscape more diverse. You want to have a dogwood, and then you want to have a redbud, and then maybe a Carolina silverbell, and then maybe something else. And, you know, and then it's, you know, 50 feet before the next dogwood. So that dogwood is safer. So try and put it into those terms. Hopefully that'll work for you. Info about Nutsedge. This is a funny question because this just came up recently with our company. Identifying and controlling it. First off, in identification, to me it's super simple, but I have an eye for weeds. So it's one of the only sedges that is triangular at the base, and it's one of the taller sedges. That's the big thing, the triangular base. And you know, it's very easy to pull by hand, and so it's one of the weeds that I suggest people try and pull by hand. The other reason I say that is because glyphosate is not as effective on nutsedge as it is on some other plants, and so there's specific herbicides for sedges. I'm not remembering the names off the top of my head, but again, if you go to Google and just search herbicide for sedge, you can do it. But I would try and hand pull first because it's easy to do. The only problem with hand pulling is you're disturbing the soil, and so you're kind of bringing other seeds to the surface, so you got to do follow-up. But it can be hand weeded and controlled. A lot of landscapers will put down pre-emergent herbicide to help control it. We don't really do that much unless it's a huge infestation and we're trying to temporarily knock it back. So lost my place here. Our storm runoff collection point floods, but the rest of the time it's just grass that gets mowed. Better alternative? Yes. Put in a rain garden. You know, get rid of the grass, give yourself a little bit of a bowl, you know, something that the water can hold in even more, and then fill it with some, you know, native plants that can handle being flooded, but also can be handle being dried out. And a lot of our native wetland plants are that way. They get it that every once in a while we're going to have drought and they're going to dry out. I could go down that road. So this is a question about their church garden, and is it feasible for our members to learn enough about pruning to handle the trees on their own? Yes. Believe it or not, there was a time in my life where I didn't know how to prune. And so take some classes. The extension office has some great classes on pruning. The master gardeners have great classes on pruning. You could probably get a master gardener to come out to your area and kind of show you guys how to prune. I'll gross you out and explain in my thinking how to prune. Sorry for this, but compare a tree to human anatomy, and in human anatomy we have growth points, and so do plants. Plants have growth points, and in human beings, you know, right here at my knuckle, On this side of the bone is a plate called an epiphyseal plate, and on this side of the bone is a plate called an epiphyseal plate, and that's where growth occurs. I'm 56 years old. Hopefully my fingers have stopped growing at this point, but through my life, that's where growth occurs. So let's say, you know, by accident, you smash your finger like I did on a job site, and you go to the doctor, and the doctor says, oh no, I'm going to have to amputate your finger. Well, he's not going to cut your finger off in the middle of the bone, right? Because that would just leave a piece of your bone up that would rot, and you get gangrene and be amputating more things. So what the doctor's going to do is he's going to go back to your knuckle, and he's going to cut your finger off at the knuckle. That's basically the same thing you do with plants, except with plants, this is called an apical meristem. And sorry to bore you with all these Latin terms, but if you follow a branch back to where it came out of the previous branch, you'll see a collar around that little branch there. And basically you go to that point and you cut at a 45-degree angle. Beyond that, what I usually tell people to do is take, if you have a big bush that you need to cut back, you take the longest branch that's sticking out the furthest, and you go back into the bush and cut that back as far as you can. And you kind of do that one by one until you get back to a certain point. And you keep going back and you keep checking and looking at things and going, okay. Whoop. Sorry, got a phone call coming in. But so having a vision of a perfect tree in your mind and kind of seeing that and pruning back and forth is what I would recommend. It takes practice. Your first tree won't be your best, so don't worry. But you know, I went from not knowing anything about pruning to being a really good pruner, so it can be done. Maintenance of weeding of the garden handled by volunteers. There have been seasons where the volunteers weren't enough. List of landscaping companies. Again, I would search Google, but Plant Nova Natives has a list. Is that correct, Margaret?
We have a list. It's just not very long, but it's maybe long enough.
And I think the Chesapeake Bay, what's the name I'm looking for, Margaret, here? Sorry,
Foundation.
Chesapeake Bay.
Professional landscape.
Professional landscaping organization. They have a,
right, yeah.
They have they have started a thing that you have to go through, kind of like a Master Gardener program, to become certified, and they keep a list of those people. So look on their website, and Virginia Native Plant Society, I think, also has some people listed. Piedmont Environmental Council puts out a shop local program that Jem, are you on? Jem Bingle, if you could give the correct name of that publication.
Go Native, Go Local.
Thank you. Jem is our representative here in Loudon for the PEC, so thank you for that. So lots of various to look out there. But again, you know, educate yourself first, and then ask the right questions to the landscaping company. Portion of the woods adjoining the church garden is overwhelmed by invasive wisteria. Any tips on removal? Again, you know, a lot of labor. You might have to get some machinery involved. You might have to get some herbicides involved, and plan on going back for 4 or 5 years and getting rid of it. But the biggest thing I would do is encourage you to develop lists of plants to not plant in your neighborhood, and wisteria should be right at the top of that list. And you know, people love wisteria because it's a beautiful, beautiful vine when it's in bloom, but my God, it's an ecosystem killer, and it escapes cultivation all the time. We maintain the National Wildlife Federation's headquarters, and there's wisteria everywhere there that comes from the LA Fitness that's next door. And you know, you got to think about the fact that you're polluting when you plant certain plants. You know, you're basically throwing your trash into your neighbor's yard if you're planting wisteria, because I lived in Herndon for a number of years, and my next door neighbor wanted to plant bamboo, and I kept asking them to not do it. And they kept insisting they were going to do bamboo because they just love bamboo. And I was like, well, you don't understand. You're planting bamboo in my yard, and I don't want bamboo in my yard. And she, you know, just one day went out and planted some bamboo. And so I did everything I could to reach over the fence and pull it out every time she did. But again, you be cognizant of the fact that your plants might escape your garden, and that's not a good thing. Can you recommend native ground cover to edge the parking area that'll need little maintenance? Part sun, part shade. The ryepe had been there in the past, but had many weedy grasses growing up through. Well, you know, the problem there, it sounds like maintenance, and nothing you ever do will be maintenance free. And again, you need to accept that fact, and you need to realize that, hey, I'm always going to have to maintain this. I don't know exactly what would be the perfect plant for that spot. Again, I'd say probably some sedges, and there's different kinds that you can use. The ryepe's not a native plant, but sometimes it's the toughest plant in the world to use, and I'm not saying do it, but you know, there's some times where it's probably the only thing will live where it's planted. But church also hosts a preschool. There have been pesticide treatments for flea and tick removal in the past. How can we handle this issue without endangering the pollinators and native insects we want in our garden? Folks, if you're spraying insecticides around a preschool, I'd be much more worried about your children than I would be about the pollinators. I mean, I love pollinators and I love insects. I love kids more. Pesticides do a lot of nerve damage, and especially in younger kids. So, boy, be really careful, really careful. So I would say do your best to eliminate it. They're showing that a lot of these flea and tick sprays don't really do anything against fleas and ticks, but they kill a lot of our beneficial insects. So I would encourage you to steer away from that in general. Again, just kind of cleaning up around there probably has a bigger effect than the insecticides would. For a garden at home, they're planting in beds that slope down the side yard, wrap around the back, bordering on woods, blah, blah, blah. Oh, this is a question about hardwood mulch. I would tell you that every bag of hardwood mulch means that a number of trees were killed to create that bag of mulch. And, you know, mulch is a byproduct of development. And in this area, we do a lot of development. We cut down a lot of forests every single day. And so if you're buying hardwood mulch, you're kind of buying the byproduct of deforestation. That's not a great thing. Now, there are certainly times when I think double shredded oak bark mulch is a good weed deterrent. And so if it exists, if it's a byproduct of this development, and if you need it for some weed control, I understand the short-term use of it. What I've encouraged everyone to use, and what we use on a regular basis, is leaf mulch. You know, leaf mulch is basically drops from the trees. You know, it's not you didn't have to cut down a forest to get leaf mulch. You had to wait until fall, and then the county picked it up and it got back into the system. So to me, a much more environmentally friendly mulch is leaf mulch, and it breaks down a lot quicker. And so if you're looking to improve the quality of your soil, leaf mulch is a really good way to do that quickly. The double shredded hardwood mulch takes longer to decompose. This person's asking about Arborist Chips. it's a good source of mulch, and it's usually a free source of mulch because those guys are always looking for a place to dump their mulch. And so if you see somebody cutting trees down in your neighborhood, you can always kind of tap the guy on the shoulder and go, hey, can you dump that at my house? And most of the time they'll do it because, like I said, they're always looking for places to dump. What you have to be careful about with chips is, are you getting a diseased tree? And are you introducing that disease into your property? So as you're talking to the tree guy, ask him why he's cutting the tree down. You know, if it's because, well, it was diseased and dying, maybe you don't want that mulch. If it's because the homeowner wants to grow grass and they hate trees, well, then you just kind of, you know, spite the homeowner and you know, take the mulch. But discussion of deer repellents would be helpful. Deer resistant plants, they focused on deer resistant plants, but still find that some blooms get eaten and leaves get browsed. A couple of comments on deer. Deer never read the books, and so they don't know what they're supposed to like or dislike. You know, I have tried different plants in different places, and Virginia sweetspire is one of my favorite plants to plant, Itea virginica, and it's a great native plant for doing great things. And you know, it will not be eaten most of the time, but every once in a while you get to a neighborhood where we'll use it and it'll be eaten. So again, the deer don't read the books. I use bottle brush buckeye a lot, and I did a planting in Great Falls, and I was like, oh, you know, the deer won't touch this, it's poisonous in every way and blah blah blah. Well, a week later the homeowner called me and said, hey, you know, can you come out and take a look at my buckeye? And I went out and they were all eaten to the ground. And so, you know, there were some very sick deer that night, and they never touched the buckeye again. So they kind of learned that, you know, that wasn't the plant they wanted, but they will go after, when deer are hungry, they'll go after everything. So what are some sprays? Liquid fence works, you know, some of the time. Bob-X is one that I use on a regular basis that I think works really well. Bob-X, I think you might only get that at Merrifield. I'm not sure, but I think you can go online and get Bob-X. The best thing you can do to deter deer is to have a dog. And, you know, I'm sitting here with my buddy Chewy, and his ears just perked up because you heard his name. He's the best deterrent of deer on my property. He's the top of the food chain, and at least that's what they think. And so he's never going to catch a deer. He's never going to do any harm to a deer, but he's going to scare him off of our property. And so not only do you get great companionship, but you get a little bit of deer control. Coyote urine is another one that is kind of effective. And what I've seen happen most is that a rotation of things is usually what is best, because if you just keep using the same thing over and over, eventually they just kind of get used to it and start eating. Most people I've heard talk about rotten eggs and cayenne pepper being key ingredients for a good deer repellent, so something along those lines. Soap, you know, there's a lot of different things, but again, I think a good dog is your best bet. And then what do you do about dog urine killing grass? Well, you get rid of your grass and get more dogs. So now, seriously though, dog urine kills grass. You know, it's just that simple. If you have an area for dogs, you know, washing it down nightly, maybe installing an irrigation system just in that area to kind of wash the nitrogen away. So it's not too much, but you know, they're dogs. Let them be dogs.